Brother-in-law. Or not yet.
Audios are.
Good, it's all set up.
Brother-in-law. So,
Robin's great.
William,
But you need to know, his name's Robin.
he is a character. So put it that way.
If anybody happens to see a person trying to get into the waiting room, let me know so I can run over.
Oh, yeah.
and-
Probably gonna hear like a little ding, usually
I
mine
think, I
dings.
think you three are gonna, I think you'll see it over there,
Okay.
like one person waiting to get in.
Oh, okay. I guess on the street, I was thinking like in the waiting room, I was thinking like, you know, hallway type thing.
You know, lots of stuff in here, Mr. Board. That was a lot of stuff put together. Thank you.
Hopefully it helps.
Recording speed.
We are on and live and
Oh, we don't have any mics.
Do we need mics? I did set that out, but I couldn't get in there because it was locked. I was here a little earlier. Bless you. Oh, sorry. Don't you, we were supposed to wear black.
I think.
Oh, got it.
I saw it.
Yeah, that's true.
Who died? What's your comment? My grandma did that yesterday.
Stop that. They were joking there. They were.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh.
I was like.
Look, no matter what, it's all. How was your grandma?
91. Yeah, my other grandma's gonna turn her name.
My grandma was 92.
She had a good life.
Neat.
Brian's, yeah, here you go.
See, mine's on too.
I got
Turn mine off.
Right, you all ready?
For me.
7:04, we'll call the meeting to order. Mr. Miller, would you like to lead us in pledge of allegiance? Pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Board members are present tonight. Mr. Board, has public notice been given?
Yes, it is.
To the minutes, is there a motion to approve private meeting minutes, January 7th, 2026? So moved. Motion made by Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mrs. Thompson. Any discussion? Bailey?
Aye.
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 Aye. It's on to information, summary of discussions from January 7th, 2026. Again, this is just, if you have any questions on the information from the last meeting, where we finished going through all of our GCs, or any corrections, now will be the time to have those discussions or corrections noted. Is there anything, board members? Okay, hearing none then, we'll move on to discussion. The governance culture policies first reading. Okay, just as a reminder, any new policies for just the board and the public in general. We'll have 2 readings. The first reading is just, we can revise them, we can talk about them, we can do all those things, but we will not take action until the second meeting. All right.
Can I add something to that, Mr. Trumby?
Yeah.
So we need 2 readings, okay? If the board ends up making substantial change to the policies, then we, by the spirit of our current policies, we wouldn't count this as the first reading. If it's, grammatical small changes, things like that, you certainly can. But if it becomes substantial, then we'll have to bring it back with those revisions and have that be our first one.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That has happened a couple of times. Okay, I'm gonna just go on the record of reading the memo here, just so everybody hears it, but also for the folks who are either online or gonna watch this in the future, since we do post all these meetings. So I'm just gonna read through it and then we'll move right into it, okay? All right, so the background, over the past several months, the board has engaged in focused discussion regarding governance roles, responsibilities, and expectations within a coherent governance framework. These discussions were supported by governance materials, facilitated conversations, and shared review documents intended to surface common themes and areas of alignment. The attached governance culture, GC, and board superintendent relationship, BSR, policy drafts reflect that work. The policies are written at the governance level and are intended to clarify authority, accountability, and board discipline while reinforcing the separation between governance and management that the board has discussed at length. About the drafts, the GC and BSR policies are designed to define how the board governs and conducts its work as a collective body, clarify the relationship between the board and the superintendent, including delegation, accountability, and boundaries, establish shared expectations for professionalism, unity, and role clarity. To support board review and discussion, contextual notes labeled context for board consideration, non-policy, are included following selected policies. These notes are not part of the policy language. They are provided to explain how board discussion informed the drafts and how certain questions or concerns fit within the governance framework. Organization of the policies. During the board's governance discussions, topics related to board culture, board roles, and board superintendent relationship were often addressed together. This reflected the natural flow of conversation and the interconnected nature of those responsibilities. In drafting the policies, the governance framework separates governance culture, GC, policies from board superintendent relationship, the BSR policies, to provide greater clarity around authority, delegation, and accountability. The BSR policies are derived directly from the board's extensive discussion regarding trust, communication, role clarity, delegation, and superintendent accountability. While the board did not review these topics under a separate BSR heading during discussion, the substance of the BSR policies reflects themes that were discussed repeatedly throughout the governance meetings. The separation of these policies is intended to strengthen clarity and coherence, not to introduce new expectations or concepts. So next steps. Board members are asked to review the attached GC and BSR policy drafts and be prepared to discuss them at the February 18th governance meeting, which is tonight. The purpose of that discussion will be to confirm that the policies accurately reflect board intent and shared understanding, while also identifying any areas needing clarification or refinement at the governance level. And again, no action beyond discussion tonight, so tonight's purely discussion. Looking ahead, many of the specific guardrails, parameters, and assurances discussed by the board are more appropriately addressed through operational expectations and monitoring practices rather than governance culture or board superintendent relationship policies. Following board review of the GC and BSR policies, the next phase of governance work will focus on that area. And again, that's operational expectations. And just also for folks online, just a reminder, all of these policies are posted as part of the agenda for tonight's meeting. So tonight, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Initially, what we were going to do is just pick each policy, like just go through the policy. However, changing things up a little bit, we're gonna do some scenarios that highlight the policy. So situations that some of us have been in, maybe some of us haven't been in, but go through these scenarios and how they apply, if they apply to policy. And versus just reading policies and trying to have a discussion on, does this make sense or not make sense at all? I think this approach will add a lot more value to the conversation. And most likely evoke a lot more conversation and discussion than just simply reading a policy, trying to make sense of it. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you guys don't have a scenario, but that's okay. We have 10 scenarios and I'm just gonna start going through them. And just as a reminder, this is gonna be a little clunky at first, but we'll find our groove and we'll get into a rhythm and we'll make it'll make a lot more sense. All right, so scenario one. Anybody have any questions, I guess, before I keep going?
Are the scenarios just general and we're gonna figure out what policies attach, or are you attaching a scenario to a policy?
There's policies attached to the scenarios that I'll be going through because even though I've read these several times, I don't know off the top of my head, without having to read through them and find them. So just for the ease for everybody, the policies, I'll list them out as we go through the scenarios so that you all kind of know exactly where to go.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from folks? Okay, all right. So we'll move on into scenario one. During a board meeting, a member turns to the marketing communications director and says, maybe this is something we should put on Facebook. Carrie, can we do that? So that's the scenario where during a meeting, open session, somebody decides to suggest to Carrie, putting something on social media, Facebook. So, and what I'm going to do that after I go through that, I'm just going to go through like the coherence model so that you guys can think about does this really kind of apply when we get to the policies, does it apply to the coherence model that we're trying to establish? Does that make sense for folks? Okay. All right. So governance alignment considerations in a coherence governance model, authority to direct staff flows through the superintendent. Individual members do not exercise operational authority. Even helpful suggestions can blur governance and management roles when directed to staff instead of through the superintendent. Does that kind of make sense with folks? Okay. All right, so then the policies in play here would be GC3, board member responsibilities, and BSR1, authority and accountability.
You said GC
3,
three, and what was the other one? The first one?
BSR1. Mr. Board, question though.
Yep.
Is this
31.
Does this kind of blur the line though between discussion 4A and 4B? I just realized that.
Yeah, perhaps a little, maybe we can go through the scenarios and just do the GCs
GCs
and just focus on those. And
Yeah.
then we may have to come back through them, at least the ones that are applicable
Yeah,
to the BSRs. Good catch.
yeah, I still agree with you. So disregard BSR because yeah, we're on the agenda again. Wait a minute. All right, so GC3, board member responsibilities. Does anybody need me to reread the situation or are you all just clear on that? You guys want me to read GC3 policy aloud? Because I can do that.
I think for the sake of the community,
Okay.
it might be important that we read it.
Absolutely. So GC3, board member responsibilities. Board members serve as trustees representing the interests of the entire community, not individual constituents or special interest groups. Authority rests with the board acting as a collective body, not with individual members. Each board member is expected to govern through policy and oversight rather than direct involvement with staff or operations. Prepare for and actively participate in meetings with professionalism and respect, model ethical conduct, civility, and integrity in all board-related settings, pursue ongoing learning and development to strengthen governance capacity. So in this scenario, during a meeting, asking the marketing communications director to do something, is that in violation under the coherence model, under GC through policy? Clear. It is. And that's because of bullet point A, govern through policy and oversight rather than direct involvement with staff or operations. Is that, everybody agree on that one?
Yes.
Okay, are there any any revisions or thoughts come to mind to this, or is how this written appropriate for like this type of scenario?
I guess I just wanted clarification. So I know the scenario said during the meetings, okay? So let's say it's not during a meeting, let's say it's just a regular day. Do you want everything to flow through Mr. Board versus going to Carrie directly? I just want to clarify that.
Yep, great question. You're absolutely, that's always the intent. Everything always follows through. Mr. Board or the superintendent, whoever that may be. Whether we're in a meeting setting or at Culver's or email, phone, text,
Okay.
any setting.
Thank you.
And two, while we go through these, maybe now is a good time to, before we move on to other things, scenarios. Was there anything on any of the GC policies that folks had issues with? Or needed revised for discussion or whatever? So any of these GC policies, I guess before we move on, let's just ask that question. If you guys were going through it, anything that stood out as needing revised or changed?
I didn't see it.
The only thing that concerned me, and it kind of goes with A, where you're talking about direct involvement with staff and operations. Say a staff member wants to talk with you about something in the building. Are we allowed to listen to them anymore, or are we just not? We're like, nope, you go to the superintendent, I'm out of it.
I think it's always, I mean, to just be respectful, listening to people is always fine, but, you know, giving direction or I'll follow up with you or I'll, you know, whatever, like, I think that's where things can get blurry. And it doesn't, yeah. And honestly, that even applies to a non-staff member, to be perfectly honest with you, even a person in the community. I think there's other policies in here that kind of touch on some of those things as far as communications and such. So in my mind, always listen, but never promise anything, never, you know, turn it over to Mr. Board. But I know we do have other policies in place, another policy in place that I think is the chain of command policy. It's that you talk to your supervisor. Okay, well, if you haven't, then please talk to your supervisor, you know. So there are other policies in place that should be utilized in whether it's a staff member or a person, you know, in the public, directing them to that specific policy. I guess, Mr. Board, anything I'm missing or you want to clarify or add to that?
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, obviously you've got to find the balance between being respectful and courteous and listening. And that's fine, right? It's the promise in this particular scenario, the directive, like, I need you to do this, right? That kind of a thing. But when people have problems, whether they're staff members or not, and they go to somebody, I think it's always appropriate to listen and then guide, right? Have you talked to, your boss? Have you done this? I suggest, let's start there. Would you like me to have them reach out to you, right? Like, I think you can help facilitate the chain of command. That would be my suggestion.
That was my biggest concern with that is having, at a ball game or anywhere in town, whatever, people come up and have a conversation. But, oh, I can't talk to you because I think right now there's a perception that staff can't talk to any of us at all, period. I've heard that a couple of different times. Well, that's not the intent of it. It's, if there's an issue, you need to talk to the proper people, and I'm not that proper person at this point. So.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up, because that has been stated before. So I just want everybody to feel comfortable where you can talk to people, and like Aaron said, don't promise anything, but, bend their, ear and take the information and bring it forward.
Yeah, but we actually revised the onboarding process to reflect that type of situation as well. And we've talked about it in open, I think, a couple of times, chain of command. So, it's a great question. Appreciate you asking, because that's a great way to, listen, but also redirect to follow the process. Because you don't want to promise something that you can't deliver on at the end of the day. Because,
Right.
To be completely transparent, I'm only one of 7 people, and it'd be unfair of me to promise something that I can't deliver. And furthermore, as we go down this coherence model road, it's going to become very clear that it's inappropriate for us to even do so in the first place, and that we have to follow the process.
I would even add to Sheila's question earlier, again, we're all human, right? Having a conversation with somebody and even a suggestion, right? Have you thought about putting that? I think that's different than, Carrie, you need to put that on Facebook, right? I think that's the thing. We're all people, right? You want to have conversations with other people most of the time. So,
And I think that's really, it's gonna be a little bit of a mindset shift with those casual conversations that we're having with people, that just have to be careful that it's not the, oh, hey, I saw this, can you take care of it? I saw it. I don't know if you're aware of it, but I'll let Mr. Board know, or whatever the case is, but I saw that. So I'm saying, hey, can you fix that? Can you take care of that? Which is natural. That's not kind of what we need.
Really the purpose here is to not blur lines. It's establish clear process through policy.
And I had gone through all of them. And I did make some notes on GC8, so just flip to GC8.
Okay.
And I think you all would know that I feel very strongly about this, work around equity. And so I was just, and if what I have to say is more about procedural things that we're gonna get to later, operational components of the policy, just let me know. Okay. As I was reading, and the reason I did make some notes is because in some of these other ones, each board member is expected to, board members will, board members maintain a relationship by, but then for GC8, there wasn't that same type of a cadence in the way it was written. And so I just wondered if we wanted to consider putting some things in there. So one of the things that I had written down is setting direction based on community voice. I think is really a component that we talked about, but I didn't see it explicit in here. And I'm just gonna read this out loud and then, you know, whatever happens with it, happens with it. Actively and intentionally seek input from a broad and representative cross-section of the community. I'm just gonna say from my experience in my past and my current occupation, in situations like this and being on strategic planning committees as a community member, as a principal, as, you know, and all these different, I can tell you that my biggest regret was checking a box saying, yeah, we had everybody represented. When in fact, we really didn't. It was, you know, it was because so-and-so's, I knew that person and so-and-so's parent, or, you know, I know this person enough where they could represent this community, when in fact, they weren't representing that community at all, nor did they understand that community deeply. And so I'm concerned that unless there's something in policy, we could, under stress or change in leadership or whatever this, you know, could be, we could easily shift back to old practices. Not that I'm worried we're gonna do that. My concern is that at some point in time, this whole board's gonna look different. And what we're doing right now is trying to create a sustainable, long-term vision for how we govern in our district.
So where it says like the board represents the community as a whole isn't specific enough.
No, I don't think it's specific enough.
I wonder if that
I'm one.
would be better addressed as procedural. Because if you start getting too specific, because these are general overreaching statements, so if you end up getting too specific, then you might get handcuffed later on in just the opposite direction. Not necessarily that specific instance, but typically these are gonna be a more wide-ranging verbiage, and then you get more specific once you get into the more of the how-to, and how do you actually follow through on the linkages with the community. But I completely agree, it needs to be included somewhere. I just don't know that this is the specific place for that to go.
And what I'm asking for is a potential adjustment to read that we're seeking input from a broad and representative cross section of the community.
So basically striking out the community as a whole and kind of inserting that in a way that flows
Yeah.
with and considers input in light of long-term student success and district sustainability. Like cutting out that one piece and inserting that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, let me just.
If you didn't cut it out and you just put after the first paragraph, board members will do this by : bullet point number 1, setting direction based on community voice, bullet point 2, actively and intentionally seeking input from broad and representative cross-section, or whatever the words you had there were. I'll add this, of every policy that we have in here and in our current policy, this is the one policy I have zero stake in the game. So I'll just offer my opinion on this, but I think Jill's hit it spot on. I actually think that those two things would fit perfectly in here. Because I think that they are general enough to not be too specific, but you're setting direction based on community voice, whether that's strategic planning, whether that's, you know, community forum, whatever that might be. And you're doing that by making sure that all good representation from a broad group of people. So just take or toss that. But put it on the record, I agree with Jill.
Sleep tonight.
How does everybody else feel about that?
I'm just thinking it's voluntary, right? If we're appealing to the community at large, it's a voluntary thing. It's not like we can, are you go out to solicit people? Is that what you're looking for? Or, you know, if you don't think the community input's representative enough, I mean, since it is a complete voluntary contract, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that part of volunteering is feeling welcome.
I'm sorry.
I think part of volunteering is feeling like you have a space at the table. And I don't think that I think that there are people in our community who would like to say something that are intimidated by things like this scenario, you know, like sitting in front of a board or talking to a board. And so I do think that people would volunteer their input when and if we offer them opportunities to do it in spaces and in situations where they are truly feeling like they feel welcome. Whether that's, and I've talked about this before, so it's not appropriate necessarily right now. One of my points is sometimes we need to go to that. We need to get out of our comfort zone and go into other places so that we can actually hear their voice, people's voice, in places where they're comfortable. And they'll volunteer it to us then. And I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think too, in fairness, you know, the more we talk through this, like, we did the same thing when we picked steering committee members. We had intent and purpose to get a very diverse, broad group, you know, rural professionals, clergy, law enforcement, like, it doesn't matter what it was. I mean, we tried to get a very broad group of people. And last night, sitting at the steering committee meeting, they're doing the exact same thing to shoulder tap, like you're saying, pretty much, people to get these different demographics and areas of whether it's age, where they're at their age or what they do for their life, you know, they're doing the exact same things through the strategic planning process. So I feel it's fitting. That's what I'm saying. And we've already kind of been doing that with what we've been doing. Honestly.
I think Jill's point is we need to be intentional to invite.
Mhm.
And your point is we can't force them to accept.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that would
So,
work out.
I think with-
The logistics of it.
With the intent of the language, I think it's to make sure that we're doing
Our due diligence.
our job to make sure that we're inviting everybody. And then they have to be willing to accept it. So the volunteer part, yes, absolutely, but we can't say, well, you have to come because you fit this, you check out this box, but we have to invite you to make sure that you have the opportunity to be there. Where you feel, like Jill said, feel welcome, be able to share your thoughts and opinions.
Yes. Again, I'll tie it right back to what we did. We had 30 people between students and staff and community members. We got 13 to say yes. We called everybody, talked to everybody, you know. They had the chance, they made the decision not to engage in it, and that's fine. But we still gave them an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the history for a little bit where we've done listening sessions and kid you not, we advertised radio, newspaper, listening session. We had 4 people show up. It was one family. Out of what is there in the county? 15,000, something like that. I mean, the school districts, how many people do we have? You know, and you got 4 people show up. You know, so it's a two-way street. You know, you can put the feelers out there, but if they don't show up, you know, is that still on us?
I don't think that's what it reads.
No, but I'm just saying that's the kind of where sometimes you get with this.
Is anybody opposed to adding that verbiage to the policy.
I'm not.
I think how Mr. Board said not striking anything, but just adding it as both.
Mr. Board, you have what you need
I think so.
to make that
And
revision?
if I don't, I've got a recording of it.
Okay.
Something like board members will do this by attempting to, or, well, actually, I don't think they'll do it by setting direction based on community voice and actively and intentionally seeking input from a broad and representative cross-section of the community. Is that how you got it?
All right, so again, before we continue moving through scenarios, any other on the GCs only at this time? Any other call outs, revisions, discussion that folks need to have on any of them?
And I would say that that revision does not, I would not call that a constitution of having to bring it back. I think you're just clarifying existing language is what you're doing, expanding that.
Yep.
That would be my feeling on it.
So hearing none, no other, yeah. All right, are we good with scenario one? You guys want to go through that again? Any questions? That's a better way to put it. No. Yeah. All right, scenario two. Parent emails a board member alleging unfair discipline by a teacher. The board member replies, "I'll look into this." So again, I'll hop down to what, how the coherence governance model / policy fits into this. So governance policies establish collective authority and a single point of accountability. Individual board members do not investigate or supervise staff. When members imply follow-up, it may shift the board into a supervisory role. So again, scenario two, a parent emails a board member alleging unfair discipline by a teacher. The board member replies, "I'll look into this." And the GC policy that this falls under is the same one again, GC 3. So GC 3, y'all want to read it, or we just want to highlight the part of the policy that this applies to?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, does somebody else want to go out on a limb and identify it? Not me too.
Obviously, obliterate again. Well, not direct involvement with staff operations.
Yep, it does.
And so do we want to talk about what an appropriate response would be?
We can, we kind of did in the last one, sort of, I think, but appropriate response is just to listen and reference policy, you know, especially at the chain of command currently. Have they followed the avenues? It's totally appropriate too to say, you know, and this is another thing too, I'm just gonna call out, because some of the board members, the newer ones may not have heard this, but in the past, when we started really reinforcing the chain of command policy, oftentimes what would happen is their feedback would get back to Mr. Board through a board member, but there was never a name, there was never anything. So how do they know the true situation to do an investigation? How do they know how to, you know, fairly do an investigation? But then not just that, but also follow up with the individual with, you know, the outcomes. So the one thing is, even if we reference chain of command in these situations and we respectfully listen to folks, the question that we should always be asking them is, I can, you know, if they're not comfortable following the chain of command, is it okay if I use your name to get, you know, to have them do their part in this? Because it's Mr. Board and his administration's role to manage these situations, not a board member. But in fairness to administration, they also need to know the person. Because I think we all know, we can hear things and some things are spoken in absolutes or the context is twisted or whatever. There's always two sides of a story. So that's why I'm saying, you know, part of that conversation is, if you're not comfortable, that's fine. However, I'm gonna use your name as, you know, to have them follow up with you. Does that make sense with folks? So I don't think some of y'all maybe heard that part of it. Mr. Ward, anything you want to add in that situation or?
I think you hit that great. It's just a tangential comment. I think that's different than giving somebody a heads up, right? Like, so-and-so is really mad. You might hear from them. Here's what it's about, right? They've just vented to you, Brady, blah, 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 blah. I'm gonna call Mr. Lane. You know that they're gonna do what they need to do. Giving that person a heads up, you know, I think is a good courtesy, just like I would try to do to you, to try to not have somebody caught off guard. I think that that's different than directing them. That would be my take on that. And I would appreciate a heads up if you know somebody's hot. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it becomes a rumor if there's no names attached, so it's really hard to pinpoint any factual evidence until you have that name.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I do have it here. So governance posture decision discussion, like in a strict delegation model, board members listen respectfully but direct concerns to the superintendent without implying investigation. So that's really what the coherence model is, because if you start to stray into the other ones, like, you know, I have in here, in a more consultative model, members may indicate that they will ensure the concern reaches the superintendent while still avoiding investigation action. Still follows that same thing. But boards must determine whether individual members ever engage beyond referral or whether all involvement stops redirection. That's the point where if we don't agree with this type of coherence model, then that's the road that we would go down, which I don't think I'm hearing. I think everybody's fine with that. Yeah, because I mean, even additional questions like looking into it, does it imply an investigation? In my mind, yes.
Yeah. This is where sometimes those canned statements come in handy for the board, right? If somebody is coming to us with a complaint or a major concern, having that kind of in our back pocket, like, listen, I'm happy to listen to you, but you need to know before we even have this conversation that I need to bring your information to the superintendent so that he can address it. And that might be a stopping point for them. And then that's information for us. I mean, we still bring the information back. Like we have this, you know, we have this encounter. Or it would be, like, yeah, here's what it is. Here's who you need to come.
Anything else in scenario 2 we want to discuss? Yeah, we'll go on then to scenario 3. So the superintendent closes school early due to forecasted severe weather. The storm does not materialize. Several board members expressed frustration that they were not consulted before the decision. So again, kind of going to the governance alignment part of it. Operational authority rests with the superintendent. The board sets guardrails and evaluates performance, but does not manage day-to-day decisions. Tension often arises when hindsight suggests a different outcome. But governance clarity depends on respecting delegated authority. So again, the scenario is The superintendent closes school early due to forecasted severe weather. The storm does not materialize. Several board members expressed frustration that they were not consulted before the decision was made. For this policy in GC4, which GC4 is Code of Conduct. The board commits to professionalism, integrity, civility, and fairness in all actions. Ethical behavior establishes expectations for students, staff, and the community, and strengthens public trust in this district. Board members will place student interests at the center of decisions, engage in respectful dialogue, including during disagreement, support board decisions once made by majority vote, and conduct themselves in a manner that strengthens confidence in the board and the district.
I apologize, Mr. Umbihan. This is actually GC6, Board Superintendent Relationship Governance. I had it that originally as 4 and then kind of clumped the two Board Superintendent relationships together
I was reading that.
didn't change that, so I
It's
apologize.
like, an A really applies to this. Like, doesn't totally apply, so it's good practice for GC6.
I guess I could see where GC4 would apply.
It kind of does apply,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
I mean, like I said, place student interests at the center of decisions. And engage in respectful dialogue, including during disagreement.
Yeah.
And really, it does apply in all honesty.
But 6 says it better.
Yeah. Yeah, so GC6, I'll read this, just folks. So board superintendent relationship governance. The board superintendent relationship is foundational to effective governance and district success. The board establishes written expectations, priorities, and results, and entrusts the superintendent with the authority to lead the organization in achieving those expectations. The board governs through policy, provides clarity of direction, and supports the superintendent through consistent expectations and fair evaluation. The superintendent manages district operations, leads the administrative team, and exercises professional judgment in determining how board expectations are achieved. The board maintains this relationship by providing clear written goals and expectations, monitoring progress through evidence, and reporting rather than operational involvement, communicating openly and professionally while respecting role boundaries, recognizing accomplishments and addressing challenges in a manner that supports continuous improvement. The board intentionally avoids actions that would blur governance and management roles. The board governs through formally adopted policy and collective action. Recognizing role clarity strengthens accountability, trust, and organizational effectiveness within this district. So with that, we would love to see what this really applies to this scenario. If you guys need me to read it again, let me know. It was the weather related one. See,
The sentence is in that second paragraph, the superintendent manages district operations. You know, that's part of go or no go is part of operations.
yep. And again, not just the bullets can apply, it can be the context within, the paragraphs or sentences as well. So even the last one, the board intentionally avoids actions that would blur governance and management roles. It's the superintendent's role to make that decision.
I can see it. Where 4 comes into play is, you can change the wording a little bit, but support board decisions made by the majority vote. But thus supporting the decisions that are made. And if it's if school is called off, in the best interest and safety of our students, staff, bus drivers, all of that, and supporting those decisions. Instead of saying, oh, that's ridiculous that we call off. Well, we're gonna have that thought anyway. It's unfortunate that we end up losing school time, but the forecast is missed. Is that our fault that the meteorologists couldn't figure it out?
Well, and honestly, there's already other policies in place, weather-related policies. Plus, when we get down to operational expectations road in the future, like something that applies in there too, I don't know. But this overall is establishing the boundary of, you know, the coherence model versus the day-to-day. So again, you know, and I can read here too, in a high delegation model, the superintendent makes operational decisions and is evaluated on judgment and outcomes over time. In a more consultative model, the board may expect courtesy communication before significant operational decisions, even when approval is not required. And again, that's, you know, in some situations, you get a courtesy heads up that this is coming. We don't influence a decision. It's just, hey, you know, just so you know, this is what's coming. Yeah. So this one kind of was tied to two different policies, code of conduct and board superintendent relationship. Anything else with folks? How y'all feeling about this? Is this flowing okay, or is it still a little clunky?
I think the scenarios really help a lot, because
Yeah.
it puts it in real rather than just reading. I think that's very helpful.
Yes, totally agree with you. Scenario 4. At a community event, a board member states publicly, I disagree with how the superintendent handled that situation, referring to a recent board approved action. And again, just as how this applies to the governance, coherence governance type of model, professional candor during deliberation strengthens governance. Public division after a decision may weaken public confidence and blur accountability. So again, scenario 4, at a community event, a board member states publicly, I disagree with how the superintendent handled that situation, referring to a recent board approved action. So this one will apply to two GCs.
4 and 7, the code of conduct that we were just talking about. If you read the title, they're right, the GCs at the bottom of it might not be here, so.
I said 2.
Yeah, GC 4, not 5, which is what's on there,
Oh, I got you.
and
I'm
7,
picking up what you're dropping.
okay.
So GC 4 and GC 7. Correct?
Yep.
Yes. GC 4, GC 7. So I have read GC 4, code of conduct. So in the interest of time, I won't read it again. Unless you all want me to. Okay. All right. So open for discussion here. We're at in this code of conduct policy with this being violation of a coherence governance model.
I think B and C. And D.
And D, B, C, and D, yep. Engage in respectful dialogue, including during disagreement. Support board decisions once made by majority vote. Conduct themselves in a manner that strengthens confidence in the board and the district. Then got GC 7. GC 7, I have not read, so I will read that one to go on the record, folks. So GC 7 is board superintendent relationship principles. The board governs this district by setting goals, defining expectations, and adopting policy. The superintendent is delegated authority to manage district operations within the parameters established by board policy and the approved budget. The board holds the superintendent accountable for district performance by evaluating progress toward board-defined results and compliance with board expectations. Accountability is exercised through systematic monitoring and review rather than direction of day-to-day activities. The superintendent is the board's sole employee and serves as the chief executive for the district. All authority to direct staff flows through the superintendent. Individual board members shall not exercise authority over district staff. Authority and accountability are aligned so that the superintendent is empowered to act and held responsible for outcomes. Unity, professionalism, and mutual respect are essential to sustaining an effective governance partnership. So again, we'll open this up for discussion. And the scenario is at a community event, a board member states publicly, "I disagree with how the superintendent handled that situation," referring to a recent board approved action.
The last line speaks to me on that one. Unity, professionalism, and mutual respect are essential.
Really almost the whole thing. Even the second one, individual, that one, sorry.
Now you're talking about the accountability is
Yes.
exercised through systematic monitoring rather
Yeah.
than direct day to day.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna read. Anything else stand out to folks? Whether or not the scenario applies to GC7? There are other areas where it does apply?
Just thinking about how to address the thought of, I don't agree with how the superintendent handled that situation. That goes to praise in public and critique in private. That'd be something that would be brought to the board to be addressed in a closed session versus being aired out in public. Because it could be potentially misunderstanding of how it was to be implemented, because our expectations might have been one thing and it was perceived as something else. And so it might be we're having to go back and look at whatever that action was, that apparently wasn't addressed properly, and be able to have a conversation and maybe reset expectations, or it goes into the evaluation and follow-up for the superintendent.
That's what I was thinking too. So I was hearing that, like, well, how do you switch the situation around? Because I'm thinking right away, alarm bells going off as far as like, well, why would they address that in public? Because typically anything that there's an investigation on is usually a closed session type thing. So why would that be being brought up publicly? That there is wrong. So I was just kind of all over the place on that one. I'm like, here's how we got corrected situation.
If it's closed, that's definitely one issue, but if it's an open,
Yeah.
that's,
So then I'm like, well, no, there's been things that, that haven't been in closed session, but I'm just like, that's so wrong.
because in this situation, really, let's just assume it's open session, because
Yeah.
I think we've got we have a very ethical board that
Yeah.
closed is
Yeah.
closed, period. So we'll just assume for all intents and purposes, it's open session. Really, you go back to the other policies we've read, like code of conduct and others, where unity and trust and all these things are key to a lot of different things. And when you start rocking the boat like that, it puts a perception out there that, number one, lines are blurred, but number two, there's a big mistrust somewhere. I don't trust what so-and-so's doing.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought of with that scenario too, and I'm like thinking, oh, this aspect is wrong. I think, Mr. Board, if any of us, which I don't feel like any of us would, but if it did happen, Mr. Board is very open to explain, you know, oh, you maybe didn't understand how I did all of this, here's how I did it, and I feel like we're all like, okay, yeah, we understand it, you know, type of thing. I think he's very open to if any of us were to come to him or ask him, whatever. Yeah,
Absolutely, because one of my expectations is always, if you have a question, you reach out in advance.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
Mr. Board does a great job of explaining the memos so thoroughly that
yes,
we really oftentimes don't really have questions because
Yeah.
it's covered. Our questions are covered, you know, and if you don't understand something, just, you know, my expectation to people has always been, get your answers prior to. And if you still don't agree, that's fine. But if you're gonna disagree, then you're gonna go on the record during the meeting professionally. You're gonna state why you don't agree with something. In this scenario, it completely bypasses what my expectation of board members has always been. And it's, you know, basically a smear campaign behind somebody's back, which is completely unethical and wrong.
The other danger of that is we don't necessarily know the whole picture. We don't know the whole story, what the scenario really was that created the action that is outside of what our thought process might have been, so it's agreeing with Aaron, his point, that have a concern that that scenario would come up where you feel like you need to share with everybody. From the source first to get more information on what's happening. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's human nature not to agree with everything all the time. You know, but if there's a misunderstanding, that's completely different. Or if it's a smear campaign, it's different, but you know, again, we should be following our code of conduct and unified in the decision, especially if, you know, we want to create that environment of trust, because let's face it, we all don't agree with everything, so. But you still have to remain a level of professionalism and integrity. You don't want mistrust and lies and all that stuff spreading around. Yeah, so or how this kind of applies to governance. Let's read this before we move on. In a disciplined governance model, robust debate is expected before a vote. After a vote, the board speaks with one voice. And that's something that it was a continual theme through the last few months of all of our meetings. If the board prefers a model where individual members may publicly express disagreement after decisions, that expectation should be explicit and understood as part of its governance culture. All right, anything else in scenario 4?
May I jump in?
Sure.
I want to make sure that as we're talking through these, that we don't fall into the trap, because I genuinely believe that the 8 of us have mutual respect and with one another. But to Joe's point earlier, what happens when this board changes or this board changes? I mean, just, you know, think about past board members and what that would look like in this model. Think about past people, you know, here, elsewhere. How would that work here? Because while we do have that relationship and trust, I'll make sure that our Constitution, you know, stands the test of time. So those things that we've talked about, do we feel that those policies reflect it clearly enough? Or is it implied because we all get along?
That's a great question. I kind of feel like as we operationalize all of these, we can get a little bit more discreet.
Sure.
Yeah, like I've said, it's, you know, I'm not a policy writer. I went on the record at one of our meetings and said that, you know, I think we're gonna continue to learn and grow as we do these things, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Mr. Board. So I think as we continue to move down this road, as we get better at this and better understand this, we can probably really start, you know, making some modifications or changes. But for now, unless something's egregious or has bad intent or whatever, you know, this is the hope here is we at least have a foundation to start on and get the model moving and not get caught up in the weeds and trying to solve every single problem that, quite frankly, probably none of us have experienced. And we're still gonna miss stuff, so.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that it doesn't. I think that's a question we've got to
Yep.
ask ourselves is, does that address those scenarios? And does it need to?
Yep, and I'm a big proponent of continuous improvement, you know, these things. As long as I'm on this board, we'll never just put on a shelf somewhere and forgotten about, like, we're gonna have to constantly be holding ourselves accountable to reviewing these things. Or if a situation comes up with somebody, you know, the expectation should always be, you bring it back to this group, no matter who the face is, and let's talk about this. You know, where is it right, where is it wrong?
Is there ramifications for falling outside the boundaries? I mean, censure and those kind of things, is that addressed in here as well, or are we going to address that?
At some point, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, you know, to like what Steve was referencing, you know, censorship is absolutely a tool that, you know, the board president can implement and use as long as the board supports the decision. And that is that is the number one tool to hold a board member accountable to their actions.
We already have policy addressing that.
And there is, you know, there. And it's all over Wisconsin state statutes and it's in the, and we added that to the board onboarding, the board member onboarding book as well, too, outlining censorship and what it means. So basically anything that falls outside of that code of conduct or in violation of any of these policies that we put in place, or any of our existing policies for that matter, that aren't, you know, GC or SBR or BSR, censorship applies to everything. Okay, are we good on scenario 4? Okay. And we're gonna be going into close tonight, so I'm hoping to grab us around 8:30-ish. We'll kind of play it here. We're gonna have to go through these twice, unfortunately, the way that kind of played out. That's okay. I'm not sure we're gonna get through them, to be honest with you. Scenario 5, the superintendent presents a draft framework describing how student outcomes will be measured. During discussion, board members begin rewriting sections, proposing specific assessments, instructional methods, and reporting mechanics. Again, how a coherent governance model would apply to this is governance defines outcomes and expectations. Implementation belongs to the superintendent. When the board selects tools or methods, accountability may become shared and less clear. So I'll just reread scenario 5 again. So the superintendent presents a draft framework describing how student outcomes will be measured. During discussion, board members begin rewriting sections, proposing specific assessments, instructional methods, and reporting mechanics. So GC2, governing commitments for this one. And again, like we kind of found out earlier, most all these scenarios probably apply to several of these in some way, shape, or form. We'll just focus kind of on these and cover all of our bases. So GC2, governing commitments. The board commits to governing with discipline, intentionality, and focus. The board directs its time, attention, and decisions toward matters of significance that most directly influence student outcomes and long-term district success. The board recognizes that effective governance requires resisting reactionary decision-making and avoiding involvement in operational detail. Governance policies are treated as enduring guidance rather than responses to isolated events or short-term pressures. Accordingly, the board will align its work with the district's mission, vision, values, and community commitments, use agendas, meeting structures, and deliberate practices that reinforce governance priorities rather than administrative management. Develop, review, and revise governance policies thoughtfully and periodically to ensure clarity, stability, and relevance. Maintain continuity in governance practices across changes in board membership. By honoring these commitments, the board seeks to govern in a manner that is principled and consistent, enabling the superintendent and staff to operate with clarity while remaining fully accountable for results. So I will open this up for discussion. How a coherent governance model, how this policy applies to this scenario.
Second paragraph under first sentence.
Board recognizes that effective governance requires resisting reactionary decision-making and avoiding involvement in operational detail. Correct.
Use agendas, meeting structures, and deliberative practices that reinforce governance priorities rather than administrative management.
Yeah, and I'll throw out there too, the strategic planning road that we're going down, A is a really good fit too, because align it to work with the district's mission, vision, values, and community commitments. Because inevitably, what would happen in a situation like this is we're redirecting somebody to do something that is outside that framework right there. We have a conflicting goal or outcome or expectation, and that's something that absolutely we cannot do. Sense of folks, anything else? So I'll just read here how the coherent governance model kind of applies to this. So in a high delegation model, the board defines desired results and guardrails, while the superintendent determines implementation and measurement systems. Again, it's their job to figure out the how. All right, anything else? How are folks feeling about this? Still okay?
Yeah.
I'm open to feedback too, so. All right, scenario 6. During a board meeting, the member states, I'd like this brought back next month with data comparing freshman discipline incidents to senior discipline incidents. And again, how it fits into the coherent model, the board acts collectively. Individual members do not exercise authority independently. Monitoring aligned to strategic priorities is governance. Repeated requests outside priorities may signal operational drift. So again, scenario 6, during a board meeting, a member states, I'd like this brought back next month with data comparing freshman discipline incidents to senior discipline incidents. For this one, the policies in play would be GC3 and GC2. Start with GC3. And I've already read this one, the board member responsibilities. Give you a minute to look it through and then open it up for discussion on how or if this policy applies in a coherent model in this scenario.
I guess for me, that's a little bit of a tough one because not knowing the context of that statement. It might be, so if we're looking at disciplinary reports, then to get a better understanding of overall status of the district, of the grades of what's happening. It might be a completely, the phrasing of it should be different. But that's a demanding statement versus would it be possible to get information to better understand what's happening? So. No, that was a little bit kind of gray area for me.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I guess I can throw out something here. So in a scenario, let's just say they're doing the second quarter discipline reports. And a board member says to Mrs. Hardy or something, for example. Actually, I have a bad example. This one, this is high school. So it goes to, you know, Mrs. Perkins or Mr. Monkey and says, hey, I would like this. You know, that one definitely references an earlier scenario where we're, you know, asking staff, we're directing staff to do something. So really, I mean, you can throw that, you can kind of infer that. I don't know, Mr. Ward, anything you think in this scenario that could maybe add a little bit more clarity?
I'll try to. One, I think we should discuss a little bit like what happens in that situation. You know, logistically, what happens? And my suggestion would be that board president would probably need to then, you know, is this something that the entire board wants, or is this something that Brady wants only, right? Is this, and then if the entire board does want that, then you are acting, at least in the majority of the board, and you are acting in that capacity. You're 100% correct, and that scenario was intentionally vague because it falls into different buckets depending on where we're at. If the public or if the board has set an outcome on improving discipline between freshman and senior for specific categories, right, then that would be an appropriate thing to ask. We have to have this in order to know if we're making progress. If it's part of a monitoring report that the board says, we want to see these things, which discipline reports are not required by law. So if the board says we want to continue to see them, then you see the discipline report, but then it goes back to, I want to know about cell phone policy, cell phone violations between freshman and senior. Then that part kind of goes back to, is this something the entire board really wants? Or is this something that an individual wants? So I think there's no clean answer because you don't have enough context, but I think the idea is, think about it on one extreme, through that community vision, they say we've got to improve this and it's directly related to discipline. Then clearly the board's going to be asking a lot of questions and trying to get that information. It's on the other end where we're not even reporting that anymore, then it wouldn't even be even close to being appropriate. And most of it in the middle is those decisions really have to come down to board president finding out if that's the feelings of the majority of the board.
Yeah. And really GC2 probably covers it a lot better than GC3.
Well, I think
But
GC3,
GC3 does apply.
the last sentence in paragraph 1. Authority rests with the board acting as a collective body, not with individual members.
Correct.
Say
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then GC2, governing commitments. Already read that one. But this one, yeah, where you use, you know, agendas, meeting structures, and deliberate practices that reinforce governance priority rather than administrative management. Obviously, it falls under that.
As Mr. Board said, district's mission, vision, values, and community commitments.
Ideally, we want to function as a board and not individuals. That's really the theme of this is, sure, if somebody has something, I'm not discouraging people from saying something. It's not that at all. It's not, and Mr. Board is not inferring that either. Like, we want people to bring things forward. However, I think as a board collectively, we should be using, you know, our structure and our governing body as a whole to decide whether or not this is something the board as a whole or the majority wants versus individuals wanting something specifically. Because while it may be a priority to one person, the other six might say it doesn't matter. You know, I think the data we have is fine, or whatever the situation may be. So again, it's not discouraging people or suppressing a person's voice. You absolutely can be heard, but I think the board as a whole should be involved in these types of situations.
I'll just throw out a little Robert's Rule of Order. So, you know, if this happened in real time, right, and we've got something on there for information only, okay? It would be perfectly appropriate to ask the president, could this be considered for a future agenda item if the majority, you know, feels the same way? And then he could take a poll and say, yep, Mr. Board, let's put that on a future agenda. If it's listed for action, you're never locked into the motion that we are recommending, right? You can have a completely different motion. You can have multiple motions under that agenda topic. So in that case, let's just say it was listed under action and a particular board member wanted something more. You could make a motion. I make a motion that we direct the superintendent to gather this information. And then if there's enough support, there would be a second, there would be discussion, why are we doing this, et cetera. And then a formal vote could be taken. So don't ever think that those things that are listed under action, that you're locked into the motion that we're recommending. I mean, we're trying to guide you in what we're looking for, but there's a lot of different things that can happen there. And you should know that you have that ability. Hopefully that helps.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anything else we want to discuss on GC2 or GC3, how it applies? Yeah, I was kind of read the statement too, and how another angle on the coherent model, governance model, and how it applies. In a strict collective governance model, individual members do not direct staff to bring items back. Such requests are considered and approved by the board as a whole. Scenario 7. The board adopts a fiscal guardrail requiring budget neutrality. The superintendent proposes eliminating a long-standing extracurricular program to meet that expectation. Board members begin debating with which specific programs should or should not be cut. So reading the coherent governance, how it applies, selecting individual programs may shift the board toward management and dilute clarity of responsibility.
And this is number 6, Aaron.
What?
This is GC 6, the 4 is.
So again, the scenario, the board adopts a fiscal guardrail requiring budget neutrality. The superintendent proposes eliminating the longstanding extracurricular program to meet that expectation. Board members begin debating which specific programs should or should not be cut. Again, it's GC 6. GC6 I have not read, so I will read it aloud. So GC6, Board Superintendent Relationship Governance. The Board Superintendent relationship is foundational to effective governance and the district's success. The board establishes written expectations, priorities, and results, and entrusts the superintendent with the authority to lead the organization in achieving those expectations. The board governs through policy, provides clarity of direction, and supports the superintendent through consistent expectations and fair evaluation. The superintendent manages district operations, leads the administrative team, and exercises professional judgment in determining how board expectations are achieved. The board maintains this relationship by providing clear written goals and expectations, monitoring progress through evidence and reporting rather than operational involvement, communicating openly and professionally while respecting role boundaries, and recognizing accomplishments and addressing challenges in a manner that supports continuous improvement. The board intentionally avoids actions that would blur governance and management roles. The board governs through formally adopted policy and collective action, recognizing that role clarity strengthens accountability, trust, and organizational effectiveness within this district. So again, I'll open it up for folks on how this policy does or does not apply to scenario 7.
Well, for clarity, in a situation like this where a program would be eliminated, would that be brought before the board before that decision was completely carried out? So what I mean by that is like this, let's say it was a completely different person as a superintendent. And they decide that they want to cut the math department to meet budgetary expectations. Obviously that seems ridiculous and ludicrous. So is that something that's discussed beforehand before something is eliminated in the curriculum?
Yeah. I'm smiling because this was intentional, right?
We're actually our last meeting kind of touched on this.
Well, yeah, a little bit, when you go through the operational expectations, you're going to have to look at scenarios and determine, even though this falls under operations, we want to know about it or we want to decide, right? And you'll clearly lay those things out. It might be something as vague as, if there's a controversial issue, we need to know about it and we'll decide, something like that. And then there's a little discretion in what's controversial, and it might be something more specific, right? If there's cut the football program, I want to know about it, right? But that's really what you have to decide through this whole process is, what do you want to know, right? If we are going to have a net 3.0 reduction in staffing, is the board expecting to make the decisions on which positions those are? Or is that something that the board is, you guys know you know the class sizes, you know where we might be able to make it work, figure it out and we'll support you. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to have these discussions on, which I'm looking forward to. So I can't answer that because I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's good dialogue to have. Math program. I mean, I know you're being facetious there, but obviously there would be policies in place that say we can't break the law and we've got to have math, right? But what if it's banned? Right? What if we've got, the nation's oldest band, and I come in here and say, we need to cut $15,000 and I'm choosing band, right? Feels like the board would want to have a say in that, but they probably don't give a rat's tail if it's something that they don't give a rat's tail about. So how do we write that and make it work? both now and then operational expectations. So it's kind of a teaser.
Yeah, operational expectations, is to set those parameters and guardrails on what it is we want to be involved in, or what bandwidth district board, this team have to operate within. And that's really the purpose of those.
These are the ones boards get scared on, right? The what ifs, right? And again, we may think "Oh, this group of 8 isn't gonna do that, but what happens when, something changes, somebody's got an agenda on the board, and that one thing that this board doesn't really think is that important, that person does. Or the superintendent isn't from here, doesn't understand history, and eliminates something that has significant impact, right? In a true coherence governance model, it really is operational. But from a practical standpoint, everything can't be operational. The board has to be involved in some of those things.
So we contextualize during the operations. Definitions.
I think if you
What-
generally
What do we
agree
want to
that-
be involved in? And what do we not want to be involved in, but not opening the floodgates and what we're not involved in? They have to have clear guardrails and expectations from us, what they can do. And if it falls outside that, by default, it would come back to the board. But then we're also gonna have a list of things too, where it's like, this doesn't really matter to us, You guys do you, you're the experts, you're the professionals, you just do it. Obviously you're gonna follow DPI and Wisconsin state statutes, policy and laws and such, so that'll be, when we get into the meat and potatoes, that'll be the fun stuff. This is just kind of the foundation of what we want to be when we grow up. The next steps is going to be, okay, now we're growing up, we know how to crawl, know how to walk, now let's start running.
Let's take the staffing situation, right? That probably is gonna be less contentious than cutting band or football, right? What is the expectation of the board if they approve to go down 3.0? Is the board expecting to make the decision on which positions and or, departments are getting reduced? Is the board expecting to, well, you figure it out and just let us know? Is the board, where on the spectrum is the board thinking that they would want to be on that particular topic?
And to be fair, I don't know how any of us can make those decisions, not living the day to day and knowing the staffing or challenges and the hours and all that stuff. So, for me, the possible outcome of this in the future might be, all right, well, don't come to us with one option. Have 3. And then the board can decide, because any one of the 3 isn't a bad decision, but at least the board has options to make a decision. Those are things that we could talk about, down the road. We've actually done it before. It's been quite a long time where we've had options on things, but actually, one of the last times I remember was actually a staffing related thing, 4 years ago. There was options for that, wasn't there? Yes. So, things we can think about. But the board making that decision, not understanding days, pretty darn hard. I'm not gonna lie. So they have some level of trust, but there's other ways that we can kind of determine an outcome. That's what I'm saying.
I also think it depends on how it's directed too.
Well, the scenario that we have before us right now, with it being reducing by 3. How do we get there? Well, we know we need to reduce by 3 FTE. I'm not gonna say, well, you got this person, this person, this person. Just because I might personally not like that person or might have an issue how they operate or whatever. It needs to be, okay, for our budget to hit our numbers, we have to reduce that. Give scenarios and knowing that, yeah, I can move this person here, that person there, whatever. There's some opportunities that building people know that we, you know.
In my experience, rarely is one move is usually 5 or 10. There's a domino effect just by changing one role. So.
I feel like, you know, with giving the administration an opportunity to really evaluate where there's space for movement or is the right place, and for us to establish as a board, and back to the governance commitments, deliberate practices that reinforce priorities. So if we are informed by the community that these certain things are priorities, then we can come back to this statement that we've established deliberate practices so that when hard decisions are being made, anytime you put a person's position, that's a hard decision, right? That we ground back in some decision-making rules, right? Like based on what the community is telling us are their priorities. And then we do our best, and you know, you do your best, and really trust that. But if we've established practices and you follow the practices, then I feel like, yeah, follow the practices, okay. Yeah. You know best.
We good? All right. Literally not gonna get through this tonight, so in an effort to be respectful for everybody's time, let's postpone and finish up the governance culture policies first reading, the board superintendent relations policy first reading, and discussion on upcoming operational and reporting expectations. We'll just postpone those to the next meeting. You want to finish the scenarios for this part? Let's do this. The ordinance. He's gonna take care of. You can, if you guys want.
How many more are there?
3.
I personally would rather get through all the governance scenarios.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, do that. I think we got the already not on their heads, so. All right, scenario 8 then. Details from a confidential closed session appear publicly. So the
Number 4, code of conduct.
yeah, so you're wrong.
Most of them are.
They're not updated. They're not well, it's not updated.
No, you do that with majority.
Oh, that would be a violation. We as a board would have to decide if you do it.
Oh, you haven't got to the policy that all right, so the government alignment considerations, confidentiality underpins trust, candor, and legal compliance, breaches weaken governance effectiveness. So yeah, GC4.
That was probably the most obvious one.
You know, check it back to this. I've already read it, so
It's probably pretty clear.
code of conduct, it's pretty darn clear that this is a clear violation of ethics and integrity and trust and civility and everything else. It definitely warrants censuring, going back to what you're talking about. Anything else folks need to Point out or, yeah, you're good. What's that you're in for?
No, I did just a past board member at one time said it was always interesting to be at the coffee shop the next morning and hear what happened closed.
Well, those days are behind us.
Yes.
Fortunately. All right, scenario 9.
Can I interrupt you, Aaron, here?
Yeah,
Because I think with my mixing up of, restructuring some of them, I think I've hit some of them multiple times, and I don't know that we have a scenario that addresses GC5.
yeah, we don't have anything decent about it.
So
But honestly, we can just talk about that one. That one's.
that's what I mean.
That's fine.
You could still do the scenarios. You could just skip right to it, because I think we don't have a scenario that addresses that one.
Yeah,
I think we fit all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Maybe not 9.
We have hit 1, 5.
Or 9.
But those are ones that talked about on the side. All right. So the superintendent during a community presentation shares that district leadership is exploring the possibility of opening a district authorized charter school or alternative school. No formal proposal has yet been brought to the board. Board members later expressed concern that such a significant concept was discussed publicly before board deliberation. So in a coherent governance model, opening a charter or alternative school is ultimately a board decision. Exploration is executive work. Governance clarity depends on clear communication and alignment. So again, scenario 9, the superintendent during a community presentation shares that district leadership is exploring the possibility of opening a district authorized charter school or alternative school. No formal proposal has yet been brought to the board. Board members later expressed concern that such a significant concept was discussed publicly before board deliberation. So that one falls under GC4 as well.
And 6.
6.
Okay.
And would 8 apply as well? So, links to the community, so if the community wasn't informed. Likewise, we were.
I agree.
GC6 is board superintendent relationship governance, which we covered in prior ones. Definitely falls under that. I mean, really, the first paragraph kind of says it all in my mind. The board superintendent relationship is foundational to effective governance and district success. The board establishes written expectations, priorities, and results, and entrusts the superintendent with the authority to lead the organization in achieving those expectations. Which this is a great idea and all, but to keep that trust, it has to come through the board first. Nobody wants to be blindsided.
What would their process look like? I hope this is not me, but doing this, but what would the board's process look like to address that? Superintendent did something that's. We didn't even vote on this. This is clearly something we should have.
It's a loaded question. I mean, typically, it's always, if it's performance related, it's obviously closed. It's not an open session thing. especially if it was, performance related to violation of policy. Strictly closed session. As far as publicly, that's new territory, I think, for all of us and how we would address that. I mean, the guidelines and the rules are pretty clear for what the board, the board can do to each other. But in my experience in the board, it's never been discussed. I've never seen it happen. Even on other boards that I watch.
Yeah, I'm only bringing it
I
up.
don't know.
because-
I don't know what that would look like. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, if it's something done publicly, we would have to act in some way publicly as well. I just don't know what that looks like. That's something that we would have to figure out.
That's why I say, because you should know what your rights are as a board as well. And these are great scenarios to talk through. Let's assume it's not me or well, you can, I wouldn't do that to you. But, okay, so you have to decide, this is egregious, we have to take care of it. Or, this was one slip up that fell through the cracks, and then where on the spectrum is that? I would hope if this fell through the cracks, this has never happened before, we don't know why it happened here, that would be a closed session agenda item, sit down with the superintendent. How did this happen? What happened? How did we miss it? Those kinds of things. If there's a pattern of events, you should know that you can always have closed session. I don't have to be involved in closed session. Brenda Coleman or whoever's in that office is your administrative assistant as well as mine. Your board president has access to legal counsel. So if you're at a point where we've had enough, this is the 5th time, this person has done this, we need to do something, even if it's written, reprimand, those kinds of things. Your board president can contact, and any of you can point that out. You would talk to the board president, look, this is the 5th time he's done this now. I think we need to put something formally in his file. Can you reach out to Mr. Strang? He would guide Aaron on how to post the closed session correctly. Brenda would help with that. You guys could meet and then decide, okay, we're going to bring him in and address this formally, or we're going to delegate the president and maybe the vice president as a witness. You guys sit down with him, go through this as a speaking on behalf of the board. Those would be kind of your options. Just so you know, if things happen that get out of control, you're hoping that you've addressed, if it's happened multiple times, again, I would hope with anybody that the board would address those things early and not just, brush it under the table, never address it. That's where it gets sticky. Address it early. Or if it's just super egregious, that you all have options to go to your board president to contact your legal authority. None of you have access to Mr. Strang unless the board president is incapacitated, or if it's about the board president, in which case then you would for that specific reason. So
It's like private sector world too, and anything that happens with staff here, the documentation. So it has to be addressed, it has to be taken care of, whatever level that is, it has to be written, put in a proper file. So we have access to that, not where it's, oh yeah, I have a note somewhere back in my notebook that, I think this happened once before, 6 months ago. It was always there.
Documentation is one.
just know you have options, and all of your responsibility collectively to bring that to the board's attention as a whole when those, especially the egregious things happen.
All right. Anything else? Yeah, so I'll just read it here. Opening a charter or alternative school is ultimately a board decision. Exploration is executive work. Governance clarity depends on clear communication, alignment. And in a high delegation model, the superintendent may explore and discuss potential initiatives so long as authorization remains with the board. All right, scenario 10. A board member requests that the superintendent provide weekly updates on minor student discipline incidents. So we can stay informed. Again, governance oversight focuses on performance and risk. Reviewing individual cases may shift the board toward supervisory functions. GC two, correct?
Yes,
Stop it, question, anything.
yeah, I know.
Oh, what?
Just 4 through 8.
I already read the government commitment, so I need to read that again. In short, the board governance through policy and collective action. But folks. That's an Aaron's brain, we don't care what you want.
I guess if it's something that, with it saying that it's minor incidents, that's. I don't know why anybody would want that unless they're, get some personal stake in it, but if it's something that, hey, you know what, I've been thinking about this, maybe we should look at, and you share that with the board. And the board agrees, that's different than, hey, I wanna find out, you know, who's squeaking their shoes in the hallway. That's completely different.
And if you're curious about something and it's not in alignment to the already established goals, it also might be something we just need to talk about. How does it connect with what we're managing?
Anything else? Okay, well, since we didn't cover 1, 5, and 9, we can look at it quick. Leave it just 1, 5, and 9. We just have this. So GC1 board purpose, the Board of Education exists to act as the community's trustee on behalf of students of this district. The board governs by establishing clear expectations for student success, organizational performance, and public accountability while delegating day-to-day operational authority to the superintendent. In fulfilling this role, the board intentionally distinguishes between governance and management. The board is responsible for defining direction, priorities, and desired results, and for monitoring progress toward those results. The board does not manage district operations, but provides oversight to ensure authority is exercised responsibly, ethically, and in alignment with community values. The board's work is student-centered, future-focused, and grounded in the long-term interests of the district as a whole. The board governs with the understanding that trust, clarity of roles, and collective responsibility are essential to effective leadership and to protecting the public interest. Earlier on, I asked if anybody had any additions, subtractions, etc. to these policies. Hear anything on this one, so. I'm assuming that the way it's written today is good.
Probably applicable to every scenario we went through.
Yeah, really it is. Okay. Then DC5. Board committees. Board committees are established intentionally and sparingly to support the board's governance role. Committees are generally ad hoc, purpose-driven, and time-limited. Committees gather information, explore issues, and develop recommendations for the full board. Have no authority beyond that explicitly delegated by the board. Operate within a clearly defined scope, charge, and timeline. Remain accountable to the full board through reporting. And dissolve upon completion of their assigned purpose. We already went down this road. as far as dissolving committees and creating an ad hoc committee for the referendum and such. It's kind of following this structure here, but if put it up for any discussion folks have. Especially those that are serving on the current ad hoc committee, if got any feedback, if this is good or if it's modified or changed.
One of the things
Pretty
that
accurate.
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it looks pretty accurate.
I was just gonna add that I think one of the things we missed / I missed in the referendum was letter C. You know, we did that for our steering committee at the suggestion of Mr. Schrader. And we sat down and we developed a very specific charge for that steering committee. We didn't really do that with the ad hoc committee, and we probably could have and probably should have. You know, this is what they're going to do. We just kind of put it under the umbrella of the old buildings and property, right? So in hindsight, we probably could have done that a little bit better, and I think that this would help us in establishing the next one.
Yeah, that is a good call out. So that's something that we would do in open at a regular scheduled board meeting as the board develop the charge. What is the purpose and intent of this committee? Absolutely, totally agree.
The only thing I have on this is, it's not necessarily grammar, but in B, just for me anyway, it reads kind of funny that having no authority beyond that explicitly delegated by the board. Just, I don't know,
That, which
thinking
is,
you have no authority beyond what is explicitly delegated by the board. It just might be a little cleaner language,
I don't disagree.
but it's minor.
That is.
It did roll out.
Yep.
I never noticed it though. I read it like the other 20 times in my head. Yeah. Right, as you see, nine. Board self-assessment. The board commits to regular self-assessment as an essential governance responsibility. Through self-assessment, the board evaluates its effectiveness in fulfilling governance roles, maintaining discipline, and supporting student success within this district. Self-assessment considers both individual contributions and collective board performance, including alignment with governance policies, quality of decision-making, unity in action, and impact on district direction and results. The board may seek feedback from the superintendent and, when appropriate, external sources to inform continuous improvement. Does that policy sound good to everybody?
Sounds good. The two questions that I have with that is, who decides if we're out of alignment? Who is our checks and balance for that if we're not doing it internal? How do we ensure? One person might say, oh yeah, everything's great.
Well, one of the things, we're gonna be going down the road here once we get caught up on some of these things, probably midsummer. Looking at different administrative evaluation tools through WASB, but also we need to figure out what the tools look like for us as well. I think number one, and I've said this several times, we have to hold one another accountable. Always holding one another accountable. So what the tools look like, that's gonna be up to us. I mean, we can use something that's cookie cutter already done through whether it's CISA or WASB or whoever it is. I mean, there's board assessment tools out there. We can look at them, but ultimately, we can define whatever that looks like. But even like it says in here, seeking feedback from the superintendent. Just like the superintendent expects feedback from us continuously, I would expect feedback from our superintendent as well, whether individually or collectively as a board. I think that's a two-way street. And even superintendent soliciting feedback from, his administration or staff or whoever, and then running that back up to us, whether it's individual or collectively as a board, like I want that two-way feedback. So how it looks and feels, that's gonna be exciting stuff for us because there's nothing today that defines that. And how do you truly, get better if you're not measuring it? But again, like I always say, you gotta hold one another accountable too. So hold me accountable. I'm fine with that. Just like I'll hold anybody else accountable. Because the last thing you want to do is, in the earlier scenario, is allow something to happen, let's just say 5 times like you referenced. Well, it wouldn't be, doesn't matter who's sitting in this chair, my expectation, even 10 years from now, that I'm not here or in this role, I would fully expect the board president to censure somebody or hold them accountable in whatever way possible. But you can't just allow things to continue to happen. So, and catching things first time is important. So.
The reason I brought that up is, Mr. Moore brought it up earlier, that this particular group of people, I completely agree that we will do that. But if in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever that scenario is, it's gonna be different people in this room. How do we set them up to be able to succeed, to have those accountabilities? And maybe it's not in this particular piece of it, maybe it's in some of the other specific ways we do these things, but just we need to be thinking of outside of ourselves when there's a whole different group of people in here. How can we help them get something based on it? Because we're kind of creating, inventing the wheel for this district and this board as we're going here right now.
Yeah, I think ideally it's, obviously people are all different. And sometimes people might have whatever reason they want to be on it, whether it's misguided or it's perfectly relevant. I have no idea, but at the end of the day, what we're really doing is establishing a culture and what it means to be serving on the Richland Center School District Board. We're establishing a culture. So even when there's turnover, hopefully culturally, even if it's a person looking from the outside and they see that culture, and even though they've got a purpose, whatever that purpose may be, at least hopefully they can at least recognize culturally who we are and assimilate into it well, but I have no idea. No idea.
I think those are some of the things the board will have to discuss, is not only the tool, but the frequency. Is it as needed, which is nice to be able to address things quickly, both ways, right? It's also a tendency to, we'll talk about it later, and just kind of gets pushed. Or do you set, quarterly? Superintendent and the board, we're just gonna sit down and we're gonna talk about things, like what could we do better? What did we really like, how it was handled, both ways, right? Is it something like that? Is it deliberate, intentional? And then the other thing, just as we think about all these GCs, that it really isn't in here anywhere, is, in the infancy stages, we might want to be very deliberate on checking these and checks and balances and reviewing them very frequently, maybe monthly, right? But at some point, we're going to kind of settle in. And again, kind of taking the words out of Steve's mouth, I think you want to try to build in some protections so that new board members, if you just have this constant, we can review it whenever anybody wants mentality, when you do get new board members on through an election process or other, and Brian comes on with a clear agenda, I want to fix that. If these are up on a cycle, well, we're doing 1, 2, and 3. right? And next year we're doing 3, 4, and 5, and the next year we're doing 5, 6, 7, whatever the numbers are. You can tell those people we're on a cycle and you've got to wait. You can't just change all of them because you have an agenda, right? So think about some of those things too, just the frequency of the policies and how you want them reviewed early. And then as we move forward, because you're going to want some flexibility early because we're living in it right now. I mean, brand new. So anyway, those are my 2
The
points.
timing of when to.
Well, I think the policies themselves too, developing them, do provide a framework for, say, the future, if an individual comes in and they're not operating within the policy, it gives you some foundation to assess them by and say, this is how you're not adhering to the policy and, either then take it from there. So I think just the pure establishment of these policies helps to provide you some framework for future assessment going forward.
And that was really the approach I took when I tried to draft it. Like, don't get into the weeds, stay high level, give some framework, and then let us build from it. And hopefully it worked out okay.
All right. So 4B, Board-Superintendent Relations Policy, first reading. 4C, discussion of upcoming operational and reporting expectations policies. We'll postpone to the next meeting. And I believe there has to be a motion and a second on that. So is there a motion to postpone 4B, Board Superintendent Relations Policies first reading, 4C, discussion of upcoming operational and reporting expectations policy?
I'll make that motion.
A second
I'll second.
discussion.
What is the definition of the next meeting? The next board meeting or is it the next governance meeting? I think that should be explicitly stated in
The next
motion.
and the next action item actually covers the meeting dates. So
So we can just add the next governance meeting. Because otherwise it can be assumed that we're going to talk about it at the next board meeting, which would not necessarily be appropriate.
March 18th.
If you were to be able to amend your motion to reflect that.
I'll amend my motion to include it's at the next governance meeting on March 18th.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Sure.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, and then action, upcoming governance meetings.
Oh, yeah. Can I just give a quick intro here? Okay.
Go for it.
I put this on for action because I didn't know if we were going to need to make a bunch of changes or revisions. So I know that we moved the governance meeting in March from March 4th to the 18th. So the governance meetings are in red. And I didn't know if we would know when any of the steering committee stuff has been established, but they did not decide those dates last night. So I don't really have any new information there. So I don't really think a lot needs to happen, but I did change it on board docs, but just so you know, the reorg that's listed on Wednesday, April 29th has to be Monday, April 27th. State law says that it has to be no later than the last Monday in April. So we can't do it on the 29th. So unless the board would want to do oath of office and reorg on April 22nd, you could do that, combine them. Advantage would be one less meeting. Disadvantage would be, although it's probably not totally applicable to this group, unless you foresee changes, but disadvantage would be if we've got things to finish up with this board, we would be doing that on the 22nd because, no one's running opposed to anyone else. The likelihood of us having the same group is pretty high. So I would not be afraid in this particular case, if you wanted to avoid an extra meeting that last week in April, you could do the oath of office and the reorganization at your regular board meeting on Wednesday, April 22nd, and then that would be before the last Monday in April. Making sense?
Tiffany, great.
Okay. Do that.
So we will need to make a motion on this then, correct?
Mhm.
So is there a motion to approve the board meeting schedule with the following revisions? April 29th, Wednesday, April 29th, 2026, reorg and oath of office meeting will be rescheduled to be done on April 22nd. And the April 29th meeting will be canceled. Fine, Mr. Board.
Yep, I think that's exactly, and then that actually frees up that week, should the steering committee want to have their community events that night, those nights.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
So just for clarification. Monday, April 27th is off, the 29th is off, everything is gonna be the 27th.
Correct.
And what time?
The same time, 7 p.m. Any discussion? Mr. Dowden?
Aye.
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 I'll make the motion to move into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.851C and F to discuss confidential staffing matters, individual staffing assignments, and consider any related preliminary notices for contract renewal purposes. The board may take action in closed session. At the conclusion of closed session, the board will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
A paper form. Yes, because I usually do every time I fall, but I don't want to put my phone out here and start taking in my